Imagine this. You're a soldier in Europe in the 15th century. You've trained hard. You're ready for battle. But then you hear that the Janissaries are coming. Your commander turns pale. The troops start whispering. Some men even think about running away. Why? Because the Janissaries are not normal soldiers. They're not farmers with swords. They're not part-time warriors who show up just for a fight. They are full-time, lifelong, professional killers trained since childhood. The Janissaries were different. Very different. They were loyal, deadly, disciplined, and advanced. They didn't just win battles. They crushed their enemies and changed the world. But why were they so much better than everyone else? What was the secret? That's what we're going to uncover today. This video is not just a history lesson. It's the story of how power is created. It's the story of how an empire trained a group of boys, raised them to forget everything they knew, and turned them into the most feared army on the planet. We're going to walk through every part of their lives, how they were chosen, how they were trained, how they lived, how they fought, and how they fell. And we're going to do it in plain language, simple, clear, and real. No academic words. No boring lectures. Just the truth, told like a story you won't forget. Stick around. You'll come away with a real understanding of why the Janissaries were one of the most powerful military forces in human history. Chapter 1. Who were the Janissaries, really? Let's go back to the 1300s. The Ottoman Empire was just starting to rise. It was still small, but growing fast. The rulers knew they needed more than just brave warriors. They needed something stronger, smarter, and more reliable. That's when Sultan Murad. I came up with an idea. He wanted to build a new kind of army, one that was not like the rest of the world's. He didn't want men who had families and tribes. He didn't want soldiers who could be bought with gold. He wanted full loyalty, soldiers who would fight and die only for him. That idea became the Janissary Corps. The name Janissary comes from the Turkish yeni keri, which means new soldier. But they weren't just new. They were revolutionary. Chapter 2. The Devshirme, a controversial system. So how did the Ottomans get these elite warriors? They didn't recruit volunteers. They didn't look for adults. They took children, Christian boys, mainly from the Balkans, Greece, Serbia, Albania, and other parts of Southeast Europe. This system was called the Devshirme, or collection. Every few years, Ottoman officials would go village to village, looking for strong, smart boys between the ages of 8 and 18. They took the best. At first, this seems cruel. And yes, many families were devastated to lose their sons. But with time, something strange happened. Some families wanted their sons to be chosen. Why? Because being a Janissary meant power, money, and respect. Some of these boys would grow up to become top generals. Some would become advisors to the Sultan. Some even became Grand Viziers, the second most powerful man in the empire. It was a strange trade, a son for a chance at greatness. But the main goal for the Ottomans was simple. Create a group of fighters who were completely disconnected from their old life and loyal only to the empire. Chapter 3. A childhood of training and transformation. Once the boys were taken, their new life began. They were converted to Islam, given Turkish names, and placed in special schools called Enderun. There they lived a strict, disciplined life. They weren't treated like slaves. They weren't thrown into dungeons or forced to suffer. Instead, they were trained, educated, and shaped like clay. They learned how to fight, of course, but also how to think. They were taught language, math, reading, writing, philosophy, and even music. Their days were full. Wake up early, train, eat, study, train again, sleep, repeat, and this went on for years. Most armies of the time had part-time soldiers, peasants with swords, but the Janissaries were trained full-time, like athletes training for the Olympics, except their game was war. Chapter 4. Total discipline, total control. As Janissaries grew older, they entered the military system. Now, they were part of the Corps, and life got even stricter. They lived in barracks together. They were not allowed to marry. They couldn't own property. They couldn't run businesses. They lived for one purpose, to serve the Sultan. This control wasn't just about obedience. It was about focus. No wife, No kids, no distractions, only duty. And with that single-minded lifestyle, they became deadly. Other soldiers might panic in battle, thinking about their homes or families. Janissaries didn't. They fought without fear, because their whole life was preparation for that moment. Chapter 5, Weapons and Warfare. Let's talk about their gear. The Janissaries were not just strong in body and mind. They were smart with tools, too. They started with the bow and arrow, one of the most powerful weapons of time. Later, they became experts in swords, shields, and spears. But what really made them deadly was this. They were one of the first armies in the world to use firearms. That's right. They used muskets, cannons, and gunpowder before most of Europe even knew how. They learned how to reload fast, aim better, and shoot together in organized lines. This gave them a massive edge on the battlefield. When most armies were charging with swords, the Janissaries were raining bullets. Chapter 6, Organized like a Machine. Janissaries weren't just tough fighters. They were highly organized. They worked in units. Each unit had a commander. Each commander reported up the chain. They followed orders exactly. No freelance moves. No wild charges. When the commander gave a signal, the whole unit moved together. They practiced marching, shooting, and positioning until it was second nature. Enemies often said it was like fighting a wall that moved and attacked at the same time. This organization was rare in ancient warfare, but the Janissaries made it look easy. Chapter 7, Fear and Reputation. It didn't take long before word spread across Europe. When people heard the Janissaries were coming, fear followed. Other armies feared their skill. Civilians feared their power. Leaders feared their loyalty to the Sultan. Sometimes, just the news of Janissaries nearby made enemies surrender early. They were like a storm cloud on the horizon, dark, heavy, and unstoppable. And unlike other soldiers, they didn't loot or act wild. They were controlled, even in victory. This gave them respect, not just fear. Chapter 8, The Brotherhood Inside the Corps. Inside the Janissary Corps, something special grew, brotherhood. They trained together from childhood. They lived together. They fought side by side. They weren't just teammates. They were family. This bond created trust. In battle, each man knew the other would not run. Each man knew the other would fight to the death if needed. This made them stronger, because a united army is far more powerful than a group of individuals. This brotherhood was one of the Janissaries' greatest strengths. Chapter 9, Victories that Changed the World. With Janissaries leading the way, the Ottomans expanded like wildfire. In 1453, they took Constantinople, a city that stood strong for 1,000 years. That victory shook the world. The Janissaries helped win battles in Hungary, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Greece, and more. They helped turn a small kingdom into an empire that stretched across 3 continents. Their hands shaped history. Their boots marched across nations. Their firepower broke walls and defenses. For centuries, the Janissaries were the sword of the Sultan and the fear of his enemies. Chapter 10, The Fall, How Power Turned to Decay. But no power lasts forever. As the years went on, things began to change. The Janissaries gained too much power. They started bending the rules. They got married, opened shops, got involved in politics. They no longer wanted to fight all the time. Some didn't want to train. Many resisted change. They became corrupt. And when the Sultan tried to modernize the army, the Janissaries said no. They rebelled more than once. In the end, they became a threat to the empire they once served. Chapter 11, The End, the Auspicious Incident. In 1826, the Sultan had had enough. Sultan Mahmud too made a decision. The Janissaries had to go. He gathered loyal forces. He surrounded their barracks. He used cannons and fire. Thousands of Janissaries died that day. It was called the Auspicious Incident, a polite name for a bloody purge. Just like that, the Janissary Corps was destroyed, gone, erased. An era ended. Chapter 12, The Legacy That Lives On. But their story didn't end there. Today, the Janissaries are still studied in military schools. Historians still write about their tactics, discipline, and mindset. They showed the world what happens when you combine training, loyalty, and purpose. They prove that warriors are not just born, they can be made. They also showed the danger of power without limits. The Janissaries rose as heroes, but they fell as rebels. And through it all, they left behind a story that still teaches us centuries later. So now that we walk through the full story of the Janissaries, from their beginnings as young boys taken from distant villages, to their rise as one of the most powerful and feared fighting forces in history, to their fall as a broken institution destroyed by the very empire they once protected. What can we take away from all of this? What made them really better at fighting wasn't just the weapons they carried or the battles they won. It was a full system, the design behind who they were and how they were shaped. They were handpicked. They were separated from the outside world. They were trained every single day, in every way. And most importantly, they were devoted, mind, body, and soul. They weren't soldiers who signed up for a paycheck. They weren't fighters who answered a call when a war broke out. They were full-time warriors from childhood until death, who lived by discipline, routine, and obedience. They didn't just fight for land or loot. They fought for order. They fought for the Sultan. They fought because that was all they knew. And in that single-minded focus, they became something different, something sharper, something deadlier. When we talk about elite warriors in history, we think of the Spartans, the Mongol horsemen, the samurai, and rightly so. But the Janissaries belong right there among them. Not because they were born into war like the Spartans. Not because they had horses and speed like the Mongols. Not because they followed a code of honor like the samurai. But because they were made to fight systematically, coldly, and completely. And once they were made, they served without question. For over 400 years, the Janissaries carried the Ottoman Empire on their backs. They won wars that created new borders. They took cities that were once thought untouchable. They protected sultans, crushed rebellions, changed dynasties. But like everything in history, power doesn't last forever. Success brings pride. Pride brings laziness. And slowly, the very system that made the Janissaries great also became their weakness. They stopped training the way they used to. They stopped following the rules. They gained too much influence and started using it for themselves instead of the empire. They started acting like a political group, not a military force. They resisted change when the world around them was evolving. While other armies brought in modern tactics and tools, the Janissaries clung to the past. They had grown so strong, they thought no one could challenge them. And that's always the beginning of the end. When the Sultan finally moved to shut them down, they didn't see it coming. The Janissaries were wiped out in a single brutal strike. No trial, no warning, no second chance. Just fire, cannons, and silence. The same empire they had once helped build destroyed them without hesitation. But here's the thing. Even though the Janissaries were erased from the military ranks, they've never been forgotten. Historians still study them. Leaders still talk about them. Military schools still analyze how they trained and fought. Because the Janissaries were a lesson, not just in power, but in design. They showed the world that greatness in battle doesn't happen by accident. It's built, brick by brick, step by step, through discipline, through unity, through purpose. They also show that power is not just about muscle. It's about structure, it's about control, and it's about mindset. The Janissaries were a system. They weren't just individual men. They were part of a machine, and when that machine was running well, it was unstoppable. But like all machines, it had moving parts. And once those parts broke down, greed, laziness, ego, pride, the machine couldn't function anymore. That's when it collapsed. So, what can we take from their story? Whether you're into history, leadership, military studies, or just good storytelling, there are some real takeaways here. Discipline beats raw strength. The Janissaries weren't the biggest or the fastest, but they trained every day and they followed orders without hesitation. Loyalty is a double-edged sword. Their loyalty to the Sultan made them powerful. But when that loyalty was abused, or when they turned that loyalty into their own political tool, it became dangerous. Systems matter more than individuals. The Ottomans didn't rely on a few strong warriors. They built an entire structure that produced thousands of trained soldiers year after year, adapt or fall behind. The Janissaries resisted change when it mattered most, and in the end, that cost them everything. Glory doesn't last forever. Even the strongest warriors can be forgotten if they lose their way. The Janissaries lived and died over 200 years ago, but their name still rings out in history. They weren't just fighters. They were a symbol of power at its best, and its worst. They rose from nothing and became the sword of an empire. Then they fell from grace and became a warning for every military that came after them. But even after their fall, one thing stays true. They changed the game, and they'll always be remembered for it. So what did you think? Did you expect the Janissaries to be this intense? Did anything about their story surprise you? Let us know in the comments below. We read everything, and we love hearing what you think. And if you found this story powerful, thought-provoking, or just straight up interesting, do us a favor. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, share with a friend who loves history. Because here, we don't just talk about the past. We tell the stories that shape the world. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.